The motion, as you know, is going to pass, but it will not have the support of the NDP, the Liberal, or the Green parties. Now, let me give you a quick recap of the motion as we get to it. It extends the mission for a year, bringing it up to March 30th, 2016. It expands the combat air mission against ISIS targets beyond Iraq. And this is the part that's generating a huge amount of controversy. It goes into Syria, including airstrikes, air-to-air refueling, surveillance operations. Canadian Special Forces will continue to advise and assist with the Iraqi forces, but the government says they will not have a role to play on the ground in Syria. Lots of questions about the mission. Will the mission help degrade ISIS, defeat ISIS, escalate a refugee crisis? What are the objectives, and how long will it take? Joining me now, Bernard Trottier, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Jack Harris is the NDP defence critic, and Joyce Murray is the Liberal defence critic. Good to have all of you here. Trottier, let me start with you. There seems, frankly, to be a fair bit of confusion on the government side on the ultimate goal here. The Prime Minister said it's to degrade ISIS. The Minister of Defence, Jason Kenney, says it's to defeat ISIS. Which is it?
Well, you know, when Iraq made the request to the United Nations, the word they used was eradicate ISIS. I think all the allies are on the same page in the sense we want to degrade ISIS. Ultimately, whether it's with Canada still there, the goal for Iraq and the allies on the ground in the Middle East is to eliminate ISIS as a threat. So that's what our goal is.
Well, the reason it's important to try to figure that out is we're trying to figure out when Canada will decide that their mission is done. I mean, is it when ISIS is degraded, as the Prime Minister said, or when ISIS is defeated? Because our contribution keeps changing, right? 30 days, 6 months, 1 year, Iraq, Syria. If you're unclear about the goal, how do you know when mission is accomplished?
Well, the end date for Canada is when ISIS is no longer a threat to Canada. So right now they have territory, fundraising capability, an economy that they control. They can use that as a staging ground for attacks against the West, against other countries in the region, and against Canada. So when they no longer have that capability, at that point we'd say that we've achieved our objective. We want to make sure that they are no longer a threat to Canada and Canadians abroad.
But, okay, so let me just ask, is that the definition? I mean, we don't know if they've been a direct threat to Canada. They've certainly, there's been a video, and someone has been inspired by that on the Parliament Hill. Bibo shooter was inspired by ISIS, but we don't know if they had any actual connection. So by that definition, is Al-Qaeda still a threat? I mean, if Canada goes to war with everyone with that capability, how unending is this?
So one of the things they are doing, in addition to just inspiring Canadians, you know, lone wolf kinds of actors in Canada, they're also recruiting people. So, you know, financing military capability. People are drawn to that. So Canadians are actually going to Iraq and to Syria to fight alongside ISIS fighters. So once they don't have that territory, once they're an underground guerrilla movement, they don't have that same capability. That's a very different kind of thing. Right now they're a quasi-state, if you will. They're a genocidal terrorist quasi-state, if you will, but that's where there's a real distinction. The fact that they can control territory, they can finance their military machine, that makes a real threat to the West.
All right, Jack Harris, this is part of the justification. Do you buy that?
Well, look, I think that what Bernard just said betrays a misunderstanding of what the ISIS is all about. I mean, Al-Qaeda was aimed at the West. They were trying to go after the West. This group and any reasonable analysts, and I've been reading about them the last serious number of days, say that Al-Qaeda is aimed at the Middle East to create a state within the Middle East. It's about aimed at other Muslims within the area, trying to establish a caliphate that will continue to grow. It's not aimed at Canada. It's not aimed at the U.S. In fact, what you're seeing is some kind of retaliation within Canada by people who are followers or inspired is a word. I hate that word because it's not very inspirational, frankly, to murder someone. But I think that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a country or a group that actually has a strategic plan to attack the West. So I think this is a misunderstanding, and the response to it is increasingly being seen as being ineffective and, in fact, maybe making things more dangerous.
The challenge for the NDP is, you've talked about humanitarian aid, but what would the NDP actually do to combat ISIS? I mean, let's the case. What if they do have this caliphate? What if they are in Iraq and Syria? Is the NDP's position there is no military response to a threat like ISIS?
No, we haven't said that. In fact, we've supported the transportation of weapons and to the Iraqi Kurds, which we were doing in the fall. We weren't opposed to that.
So you would support sending lethal weapons to ISIS?
We supported,
the Kurds,
supported that. So it's not a question of no military or not. The issue here is how does ISIS get defeated? And it's not going to be done by an American-led mission from the West. It's actually going to have to be done by the Muslim and Arab nations in the area who
But they are part of the
threatened
coalition.
by them too, because there's a big, long history of Western intervention in the Middle East, all of which has been frankly unsuccessful and made things worse. So something has to happen on a different and a diplomatic level for that. But the question right now is, we've got a government who went in there, misled the Canadian public about what they were doing. We don't know how long they're going to be there. We don't know what they're going to do next. The Prime Minister said the other day, we have made important deployments. We could easily change them. Well, that's deeper and deeper and deeper with actually no end in sight, because as military leaders said, this is going to years. And Canada can be up to its neck very quickly.
I'm trying to, now let's get the Liberal position here. So the Liberals supported the 30-day mission, not the 6-month-long mission just in Iraq. Now you don't support the mission in Iraq and expanding it and extending it into Syria. What's the rationale for the Liberal position not to vote for the...
Let's go back to the 30-day mission that we did support. We supported a training non-combat mission. And unfortunately, as I think Jack just mentioned, the Prime Minister actually allowed the troops to morph into being at the combat front lines when he explicitly said they wouldn't.
Oh, to be fair, that was, but
so
the 6-month mission, before you found out that the Special Forces were at the front line, you had already voted against the 6-month mission, to be fair.
That's true, and we voted against the combat mission. So we have been clear that that is the line that we are drawing. There's combat military mission, we are not for that. And there is non-combat military, and that's some of the things that you just described. And in fact, the NDP's motion, their amendments, explicitly rule out training. And we don't understand that, because at the same time, Jack just said that it should be the Iraqi troops that are leading the charge there to protect their people and their territory. And we know that they need some professional advice and training, and so the Liberals are for that, but not in a combat role,
but
not at the front lines.
The critique for the Liberals is you're for the bombing mission as long as someone else does the job. We'll train them, but someone else bombs them. And you even have an MP like Erwin Cotler to abstain because of issues like the responsibility to protect hundreds of thousands of people in Syria who've been killed by it. And then, the Yazidis, and there's a whole group of people that have been murdered by ISIS. What's the Liberal view on that? Is there a rift amongst Liberals that you're not fulfilling the responsibility to protect?
Well, Evan, I think you know quite well that responsibility to protect has not been invoked in this case, because there is not the conditions that are required for that. And we have a broad range of Canadians that support our party, and we have a broad range of ideas within our party. But we are very concerned about the fact that there is not a clear objective in this motion to extend, deepen this combat into Syria. We're concerned that there is no plan. When you were talking about the two different statements of the objectives, the disagreement between the Prime Minister and the Minister, that creates a great deal of uncertainty. And in fact, the definition we just heard from Bernard, which is that when they can no longer be a threat to Canada, that's the kind of thing that the Prime Minister could interpret any way he wants at any time he wants. So there is no clarity with that, and it is not in the Canadian interest to get mired in a combat mission in Syria when there's absolutely no clarity that we could get out within a decade.
Let me just get a couple things quickly, Mr. Trottier. Tonight, the end game here in Syria. And I asked this to Mr. Kenney. Frank, I wasn't sure the answer here. If, in fact, the government is successful and ISIS is defeated or degraded, what happens to the territory inside Syria? Who do you turn it over to? Your government said Canadians are bombing it. Who takes over that territory?
Yeah, well, first of all, Canada's not alone in making that decision. When is it over? When is when do we declare victory? Obviously, we're working with a number of allies.
What's the end game?
So the end game, again, is focused on ISIS. That's our end game right now. We're not there to to build a Syrian state. That's not part of our mission. That's not part of our
But to be fair, but hang on, before you
consultation
say
with
that, I
Parliament.
get that, I know, but if ISIS is defeated, you're there because there was a vacuum, no one was there. Do you turn it over to Assad? Do you turn it over to al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army? I mean, there's been a 2-year civil war that's killed 200,000 people. If you take out ISIS, what do you think happens there? Who fills the void?
Yeah, well,
ISIS has filled the void in Libya. I mean,
sure.
This is the lesson of Libya.
Yeah, so I mean, just staying focused on what our actual mission is and what Canada's role is. I mean, we're not there to build Syria. That's not our role. That's not our mission right now. There are other actors in the region. I know Saudi Arabia and Iraq and other countries have a vested interest in doing something about the Iraqi situation.
But
Turkey also.
so do the Iranians.
Right.
I mean,
So
once you
we're
leave
not
a power
asking-
vacuum,
Sure.
who fills? I mean, is it incumbent on you to be responsible as a government to think beyond your own? You bomb, you take them out. Look, it happened in Libya, it happened in Iraq, it happened in Afghanistan. All these. The lesson has been. Even Charles Bouchard, the Canadian NATO general in Libya, said we left too early. We needed to be around to stabilize. What happens next?
So, you know, I'll keep saying it. Ultimately, there has to be a political solution in Syria. That means that, you know, Assad is not going to be that political solution. There's going to have to, some other forces are going to have to emerge. Right now, ISIS is such a negative force, slaughtering, committing acts of barbarism in Syria. They are terrorizing the local population.
So is Assad, though.
So is Assad. So we're not saying that this is Assad's, you know, his purpose is not to take over from where ISIL left off. We recognize that the local actors, the Turkeys, the Iraqs, they have to come together and come up with a regional solution.
Are you saying Canada has no, after participating in bombing in Syria, you have no responsibility to be there to stabilize? You bomb it, you can declare whatever, at any point declare degrading and defeating, and then pull out, and then what?
So right now, we're there to stabilize Iraq, and the mission in Syria is part of the mission to stabilize Iraq. I mean, let's face it, ISIL is staging attacks against Iraqis from their base in Syria right now. So it's one step at a time here. We have to get you know, there's a democratically elected, recognized government, and we're there to support, and part of that support includes going into Syria and conducting those missions
Okay,
there.
so if that's the case, do you accept that if the goal is to defeat ISIS or maybe to stabilize Iraq, again, to be fair, I'm not, the goalposts keep shifting a bit here, but what do you make of that? Is that the goal?
Well, if this government is in power, we're going to be here in 4 or 5 years talking about an expanded mission, because this is not going to happen all that soon. But as you point out quite rightly, you know, you just can't take one piece of the puzzle and figure by pulling that out that solves the problem. We've been down that road, and I say we, Canada, have been down that road in Libya. We, the NDP, supported that mission. Despite what Mr. Kenny says, that the NDP never ever supported an international intervention. We supported that mission based on the responsibility to protect and the Security Council resolutions. We supported an extension of that mission. But once it went beyond the responsibility to protect, change morphed into something else. It was all about regime change. We stopped our support. We saw what happened after that. The government's destroyed, and people walked away. And what we're left with now, we have ISIS operating there. We have other.
You may not like the cause, but if you want to help refugees, don't you have to stop the force that's causing refugees?
There's 2.5 million refugees already there waiting to be helped.
Because of Assad and ISIS, though.
Yeah, but they're there. They're still there. They're still dying.
But
they
if you
still
do
need
nothing
help.
about the cause,
they still
does
need
the problem
help.
grow?
Well, are we going to do everything? The nations in this coalition, there's only a handful of them actually engaged in bombing. So, you know, there's people providing military assistance as we are outside of the bombing and attack. So Canada has to define what role it's going to play. And we believe that Canada can play a far more robust role of humanitarian support than we are doing, because I don't think we're really contributing to the solution by engaging in bombing.
All right, you want to weigh in? Final
well,
thought.
the way you laid it out there, Evan, actually pretty much explains why the Liberals don't believe that this extension and expansion into Syria is in our national interest. Not only the unclear objectives and competing objectives, not only the fact that it's potentially an unending combat mission, the risk that we could well help Bashar al-Assad to consolidate his power. If we don't, we may well be helping al-Qaeda and al-Nusra consolidate their power. It is so unclear. There is no game plan because there's no clarity what we're trying to do. We do know we need to do is address the fact that countries like Lebanon and Jordan are seriously at risk of being destabilized by this huge flood of refugees coming in that they're trying to take care
But
of.
I
And we know there is only a fraction of the funds that are needed to support the refugees in the area.
Just obviously the argument is that Canada is doing part of that. This is not going to get less complicated. I think it's going to get more complicated. Bernard Trottier, Harris and Joyce Murray.